When 290 Navy SEALs were pinned down by overwhelming enemy forces in the mountains of Eastern Europe, High Command wrote them off as lost. But Devon Evans, a 26-year-old British Thunderbolt pilot who'd been dismissed as too emotional and lacking killer instinct, was about to prove that sometimes the most underestimated warrior becomes the most dangerous. What she did next would rewrite military history and leave her superiors speechless. The pre-dawn briefing at RAF Thornwick began at 0500 hours, but Devon Evans had been awake since 3 a.m., staring at the tactical displays in the empty operations center. Her coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, but she barely noticed. Outside the reinforced windows, the Yorkshire countryside lay shrouded in morning mist, peaceful and deceptive in its tranquility. At 26, Devon stood 5'4", with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style and green eyes that burned with an intensity that made her superiors uncomfortable. She'd been flying A-10 Thunderbolts for 3 years, longer than most pilots lasted in the demanding ground attack role, but she remained perpetually assigned to training missions and equipment tests. Never the real operations. Never the missions that mattered. The other pilots called her Duchess behind her back, a reference to her upper-class Birmingham accent and her tendency to overthink tactical situations. They didn't mean it maliciously, but Devon heard the dismissal in their voices. She was the pilot who asked too many questions, who worried about civilian casualties, who hesitated when aggression was called for. In a squadron full of Type A personalities who lived for the adrenaline rush of combat, her methodical approach was seen as weakness. Squadron leader James Mackenzie entered the briefing room with his usual swagger, followed by the core group of pilots who'd been selected for the most dangerous missions. Devon recognized the faces: Harper, Davies, Sullivan, Morrison. All men, all veterans of multiple combat deployments, all carrying themselves with the confidence that came from being repeatedly chosen for the work that mattered. She found her usual seat in the back row, notepad ready, though she already suspected what was coming. The pattern had repeated itself dozens of times over the past year. High-priority mission briefings where she'd take notes, ask thoughtful questions, and then be assigned to equipment maintenance or training flights, while the real work went to others. "Gentlemen," Mackenzie announced, his voice carrying across the room, "we've got a developing situation in the Carpathian Mountains. Intelligence suggests a major operation brewing, and we need our best pilots ready for rapid deployment." Devon's pen hovered over her notepad as Mackenzie began outlining the operational area. Eastern European terrain, mountainous regions with limited visibility, hostile forces with advanced anti-aircraft capabilities. She'd studied these areas extensively during her off-duty hours, memorizing topographical features, weather patterns, and tactical considerations that most pilots never bothered to learn. "The enemy has been increasing activity in Grid Sector 7, Mackenzie continued, pointing to the large tactical display. "Satellite imagery shows significant movement, and we're expecting contact within the next 48 hours. I need pilots who can operate in high-threat environments with minimal support." Devon leaned forward slightly. This was exactly the kind of mission she'd been preparing for, the scenario she'd run through in simulation hundreds of times. Her knowledge of the terrain was encyclopedic, her tactical planning meticulous, but she already knew she wouldn't be selected. "Harper, you're a lead flight. Davies, you're his wingman. Sullivan, you'll take the second element with Morrison as backup." Mackenzie's voice carried the weight of command as he assigned the prime positions. "The rest of you will remain on standby for secondary operations." Devon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Secondary operations. Always secondary operations. She caught fragments of conversation as the selected pilots discussed strategy and compared notes on their previous combat experience. Their confidence was palpable, their enthusiasm infectious. But beneath their bravado, Devon heard assumptions and oversights that worried her. "Should be straightforward enough," Harper was saying to Davies. "Get in, hit the targets, get out. These mountain militias don't have anything that can touch a Thunderbolt at altitude. Agreed, Davies replied. Quick and dirty, in and out before they know it hit 'em. Devon bit back the urge to point out the tactical flaws in their thinking. The terrain maps she'd studied showed numerous defensive positions that could house portable surface-to-air missiles. The weather patterns indicated potential cloud cover that could force low-altitude approaches. The intelligence reports, while sparse, suggested these weren't militia forces, but well-equipped regular troops with modern equipment. But she said nothing. Experience had taught her that unsolicited tactical advice from the squadron's overcautious pilot was rarely welcome. Her concerns would be dismissed as overthinking, her preparations labeled as excessive. Better to remain quiet and hope that her colleagues' confidence was justified. As the briefing dispersed, Devon gathered her notes and prepared to return to her assigned duties: equipment inspections, maintenance flights, and training exercises. The important work would be handled by pilots who'd earned their place through aggression and split-second decision-making, not through careful study and methodical preparation. She was almost to the door when Mackenzie's voice stopped her. "Evans, a word." Devon turned back, her expression neutral despite the knot forming in her stomach. She'd learned to hide her disappointment behind professional composure, to accept criticism without showing how deeply it cut. "Sir?" Mackenzie studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I've been reviewing your performance evaluations, Evans. Technically, you're one of our most skilled pilots. Your knowledge of systems and procedures is exceptional." "Thank you, sir." However, Mackenzie continued, and Devon braced herself for what she knew was coming. "There are concerns about your tactical mindset. Combat flying requires quick decisions and aggressive action. Hesitation can be fatal." "I understand, sir. I hope you do, because until you demonstrate the killer instinct this job requires, you'll remain on training duties. We can't afford to have pilots who second-guess themselves when lives are on the line." Devon nodded curtly and left the briefing room, her shoulders straight despite the familiar sting of dismissal. Behind her, she could hear the selected pilots making plans for the evening, their voices filled with the camaraderie that came from shared purpose and mutual respect. She walked back to her quarters alone, already planning her next training session and wondering if she'd ever get the chance to prove that sometimes the most careful preparation was worth more than raw aggression. Devon's quarters at RAF Thornwick were spartanly decorated, but the walls told a story that few people ever saw. Detailed topographical maps covered every available surface, marked with her own annotations and tactical notations. Weather pattern charts tracked seasonal changes across Eastern Europe. Technical manuals for enemy aircraft and service-to-air missile systems sat stacked on her desk, their pages filled with her handwritten notes. While her squadron mates spent their evenings at the officers' club or in the nearby town of Harrogate, Devon immersed herself in study. She'd acquired these materials through official channels when possible, personal connections when necessary. Her background in international relations from Oxford had given her a network of contacts in military intelligence, and she'd maintained those relationships even as her career stagnated. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same methodical approach that her superiors criticized as overthinking had made her the most knowledgeable pilot in the squadron about current operational theaters. She could identify enemy aircraft by their engine signatures, predict weather patterns 3 days out, and navigate terrain maps with the precision of a cartographer. Tonight, as she had for the past 6 months, Devon focused on the Carpathian Mountains. Something about the intelligence briefings didn't sit right with her. The enemy movement patterns suggested more than routine activity. The timing coincided with multiple geopolitical factors that made the region a powder keg waiting for a spark. Her secure laptop displayed classified satellite imagery she'd requested through proper channels, claiming it was for enhanced tactical awareness training. The images showed a buildup of forces that went far beyond what Mackenzie had described in the briefing. This wasn't a militia operation or a border skirmish. This was preparation for something major. Devon cross-referenced the imagery with signals intelligence reports she'd obtained from a contact at GCHQ. Radio traffic in the region had increased by 300% in the past 2 weeks. The pattern suggested coordination between multiple military units, possibly including foreign advisors or trainers. Whatever was brewing in those mountains was bigger and more dangerous than anyone at RAF Thornwick realized. She pulled up the technical specifications for the A-10 Thunderbolt and began running calculations: payload configurations for different mission types, fuel consumption rates at various altitudes, optimal attack angles for ground targets in mountainous terrain. Her fellow pilots knew these basics, but Devon had pushed beyond basics into the realm of aerospace engineering. The Thunderbolt was designed for close air support, built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that could shred armor from miles away. But it was also slower and more vulnerable than modern fighters, dependent on surprise and tactical superiority to survive in hostile airspace. Most pilots relied on speed and aggression to overcome these limitations. Devon had developed a different philosophy. She believed that perfect preparation could overcome any disadvantage. Know the enemy's capabilities better than they did. Understand the terrain with the precision of someone who'd walked every ridge. Predict weather patterns with the accuracy of a meteorologist. Leave nothing to chance, because chance got people killed. Her tactical notebook contained scenarios that she'd never shared with anyone. Contingency plans for equipment failures, alternative approach routes for every major target in Eastern Europe, emergency procedures for situations that the standard operating manual didn't cover. She developed these on her own time, using her own resources, because she believed that a pilot's job was to be ready for anything. The phone rang, interrupting her concentration. The caller ID showed her sister's number from London, but Devon hesitated before answering. Sarah was a successful barrister, everything their parents had hoped their daughters would become: successful, respected, properly ambitious within acceptable boundaries. She never understood Devon's choice to join the military, much less her obsession with being the best at a job that seemed determined to keep her on the sidelines.
The first crack in Devon's carefully maintained professional facade appeared 3 days after her late-night intelligence analysis. She was in the squadron's briefing room, reviewing maintenance reports, when she overheard Flight Lieutenant Davies talking to Morrison near the coffee station. "I swear she's losing it," Davies muttered, stirring sugar into his cup. "Last night I saw her light on at 0200. That's the 3rd time this week." Morrison glanced toward Devon, lowering his voice slightly. "What do you think she's doing in there? I mean, it's not like she has actual missions to prep for." "That's just it," Davies replied. "Harper mentioned she's been requesting classified intelligence reports, claims it's for tactical awareness training, but who needs that level of detail for equipment maintenance flights?" Devon kept her eyes on her paperwork, but every word hit like a small electric shock. Her dedication was being twisted into something suspicious. Her preparation painted as obsessive behavior by people who couldn't understand the difference between thoroughness and paranoia. "Maybe she thinks if she studies hard enough, Mackenzie will finally give her a real mission," Morrison suggested with a chuckle that held no malice but stung nonetheless. "More likely, she'll talk herself out of ever flying combat," Davies countered. "You know how she gets in briefings. Always asking about civilian casualties, collateral damage protocols, risk assessment matrices. She thinks too much." Flight Lieutenant Harper joined the conversation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been selected for the most dangerous missions. "It's not thinking that's the problem. It's the wrong kind of thinking. Combat aviation requires split-second decisions based on instinct and training. You can't hesitate to analyze every variable." "Exactly," Davies agreed. "Remember the simulation last month? She had perfect positioning on the target, textbook approach, but she held back because her tactical computer showed a 12% probability of civilian presence in the area." 12%, Morrison repeated with disbelief. "In a combat zone, during a military operation." "That's the problem right there," Harper said definitively.
She's so concerned with being perfect that she forgets the mission comes first. Perfect is the enemy of good, especially when people are counting on you to act. Devon's pen stopped moving across her maintenance checklist. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that her caution came from understanding the true costs of warfare, not from cowardice. But she also knew that explaining would only reinforce their perception of her as someone who overthought everything. The conversation shifted to other topics, but the damage was done. Devon realized that her colleagues weren't just dismissing her capabilities anymore. They were questioning her judgment, her commitment, her fitness for the role she'd trained her entire adult life to perform. Over the following days, the whispers grew more pointed. Devon noticed conversations stopping when she entered rooms, meaningful glances exchanged when she asked technical questions during briefings. Her requests for additional training were met with polite delays and bureaucratic obstacles that hadn't existed before. The breaking point came during a squadron meeting about operational readiness standards. Wing Commander Patricia Wells, visiting from RAF Thornwick, was reviewing pilot performance metrics when she addressed Devon directly. "Flight Lieutenant Evans, your technical scores are consistently among the highest in the squadron, but there are concerns about your operational mindset." Devon felt every eye in the room turn toward her. "Ma'am?" "Your training instructors report that you tend to overanalyze tactical scenarios. While thoroughness is commendable, combat aviation demands decisive action under pressure. Hesitation can be fatal, not just for you, but for the people depending on your support." "With respect, ma'am, I believe careful preparation enhances decisiveness rather than hindering it." Wells raised an eyebrow. "Preparation, yes, but there's a difference between being prepared and being paralyzed by possibilities. Your simulation records show extended decision times that would be unacceptable in actual combat." Devon's chest tightened. "Those simulations included civilian risk factors that I felt required careful consideration. Consideration that cost precious seconds," Squadron Leader Mackenzie interjected. "In real combat, those seconds could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of ventilation systems. Devon could feel her career slipping away, her reputation being redefined as thorough professional to indecisive liability. Everything she had worked for was being reduced to a character flaw that made her unsuitable for the job she had dedicated her life to mastering. "Furthermore," Wells continued, "there are reports that you've been conducting unauthorized intelligence analysis, studying operational areas outside your assigned duties. While initiative is valued, there's a concerning pattern of overreach that suggests difficulty accepting your assigned role." Devon's heart hammered against her ribs. Her months of careful study, her detailed analysis of threats and opportunities was being characterized as insubordination. The very preparation that made her more knowledgeable than anyone in the room was being used as evidence against her. "Ma'am, I've always performed my assigned duties to the highest standard while developing additional expertise that could benefit the squadron." "That's precisely the issue," Squadron Leader Mackenzie interrupted. "Your assigned duties are equipment maintenance and training flights. Developing expertise beyond your role suggests either dissatisfaction with your position or failure to understand the importance of specialization in military operations." Wells nodded approvingly. "Military effectiveness depends on each person fulfilling their designated function. When individuals attempt to exceed their authorized scope, it creates confusion and potentially dangerous situations." Devon looked around the room at faces that ranged from sympathetic to smugly satisfied. Harper and Davies exchanged a meaningful glance that suggested her reputation as the squadron's problem pilot was now officially established. "I understand, ma'am," Devon replied quietly, knowing that any further defense would only reinforce their perception of her as someone who couldn't accept criticism or authority. After the meeting, Devon walked to her quarters with the feeling that she had just witnessed her own professional execution.
Her dedication had been redefined as obsession, her preparation as overreach, her thoroughness as indecision. The qualities that made her a better pilot were being used to justify keeping her away from the work that mattered.
The summons to Squadron Leader Mackenzie's office came on a gray Thursday morning that matched Devon's mood perfectly. She'd spent the previous evening updating her intelligence analysis, tracking enemy movement patterns that confirmed her worst fears about the upcoming NATO operation. But after the squadron meeting with Wing Commander Wells, she knew that sharing her concerns would be seen as more evidence of her inability to stay within her assigned lane. Mackenzie's office was a shrine to military aviation history. Model aircraft lined his shelves, and the walls displayed photographs from his combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Behind his desk hung his Distinguished Flying Cross, earned during a particularly dangerous close air support mission that had saved an entire infantry company. Devon sat across from him, her posture erect despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd learned to read Mackenzie's moods from the set of his shoulders and the way he arranged papers on his desk. Today, everything about his body language suggested disappointment and barely contained frustration. "Evans, we need to have a serious conversation about your future in this squadron." Devon's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, your technical skills are exceptional. Your knowledge of aircraft systems and procedures is probably the best I've seen in 15 years of command. But skills alone don't make a combat pilot." Mackenzie leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same expression she'd seen him use when evaluating difficult tactical problems. Combat aviation is about trust, Evans. Trust in your equipment, trust in your training, and trust in your instincts. But most importantly, it's about your squadron mates trusting you to make the right decisions under pressure. "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because your recent behavior suggests otherwise." Mackenzie pulled a file from his desk drawer. "Flight Lieutenant Harper reports that during last week's tactical exercise, you broke formation to conduct additional reconnaissance of a target area that had already been cleared." Devon remembered the incident clearly. Her analysis of the terrain had suggested potential hidden defensive positions that the standard reconnaissance hadn't identified. She'd been proven right when the exercise controllers revealed secondary threats that would have cost lives in actual combat. "Sir, my reconnaissance identified threats that weren't part of the exercise scenario," Mackenzie interrupted sharply. "You made an unauthorized decision that left your wingman without support and disrupted the entire tactical plan." "The tactical plan had vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed." Mackenzie's expression hardened. "The tactical plan was developed by experienced officers using proven procedures. Your job was to execute that plan, not to second-guess it based on your personal theories about what might be hiding in every shadow." Devon felt the familiar frustration building in her chest. Her personal theories were based on months of detailed intelligence analysis and tactical study. She'd identified real threats that others had missed, but instead of being praised for thoroughness, she was being criticized for initiative. "Furthermore," Mackenzie consulted the file, "I've received reports about your off-duty activities, requesting classified intelligence reports, studying operational areas outside your assigned duties, maintaining detailed analyses of foreign military capabilities. This behavior is becoming a pattern of concern." "Sir, I believe that understanding potential operational environments makes me a more effective pilot. Your operational environment is the training airspace over Yorkshire and the North Sea. Your job is to maintain equipment readiness and conduct training flights, period." Devon stared at her commanding officer, seeing not the mentor she hoped for, but another person determined to keep her in a box she'd outgrown months ago. "Sir, with respect, limiting my knowledge and preparation doesn't serve the squadron's interests." "It serves the squadron's interests perfectly," Mackenzie replied coldly. "Military effectiveness depends on clear chains of command and defined roles. When junior officers start conducting their own intelligence analysis and making tactical decisions without authorization, it creates chaos. Even when that analysis identifies threats that official channels have missed." Mackenzie's face flushed with anger. That's exactly the kind of arrogance I'm talking about, Evans. You think you know better than professional intelligence officers with decades of experience? You think your unauthorized research has uncovered threats that NATO intelligence has overlooked? Devon wanted to explain about the satellite imagery, the communication intercepts, the pattern analysis that clearly showed a trap being prepared for NATO forces, but she also knew that Mackenzie wouldn't listen. Her warnings would be dismissed as more evidence of her inability to accept her limitations. "I'm trying to be thorough in my preparation, sir. You're trying to do everyone else's job instead of focusing on your own, and it's affecting your performance in your actual duties. Your maintenance reports are increasingly delayed because you're spending time on unauthorized activities. Your training flight schedules are irregular because you're distracted by intelligence analysis that isn't your responsibility."
The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet at RAF Thornwick at precisely 0347 hours. Devon jolted awake in her quarters, instantly alert as the base's communication systems crackled to life with urgent radio traffic. She'd been sleeping fitfully, her dreams filled with images of enemy positions and trapped soldiers based on the intelligence analysis she'd been forbidden to continue. Emergency. All personnel to duty stations. Code red. Emergency. All personnel to duty stations. Code red. Devon threw on her flight suit and ran toward the operations center, her heart hammering with a mixture of dread and terrible confirmation. The corridors filled with personnel moving with practiced urgency, but she could see confusion in their faces. Code red emergencies were rare at RAF Thornwick, reserved for situations that threatened NATO operations at the highest level. The operations center buzzed with chaotic activity. Multiple screens displayed tactical information, radio operators coordinated with various command centers, and senior officers clustered around the main display with expressions of growing alarm. Devon found a position near the back of the room where she could observe without drawing attention. Wing Commander Wells stood at the center of the chaos, her face grim as she coordinated the response. "Confirm the coordinates again," she barked into her headset. "I need exact positions for all teams in the operational area." Squadron Leader Mackenzie approached the main display, his face pale as he absorbed the incoming information. Devon strained to hear the radio chatter, catching fragments that made her blood turn cold. "SEAL Team Alpha, no response for 6 hours. SEAL Team Bravo, last communication at 0130, status unknown. Heavy enemy activity in Grid Sector 7. Multiple surface-to-air missile sites active." Devon's stomach dropped. Grid Sector 7 was the exact area she'd identified in her unauthorized intelligence analysis, the region where she'd tracked massive enemy buildup for the past 3 weeks. The trap she'd feared was being sprung exactly as she'd predicted. "How many teams are unaccounted for?" Wells demanded. 14 SEAL teams, ma'am," came the reply from a communications specialist. "Total personnel missing, 290 operators." The number hit the room like a physical blow. 290 Navy SEALs, the most elite special operations forces in the world, had vanished into the Carpathian Mountains. Devon knew from her terrain analysis that the region was perfect for defensive operations, multiple layers of concealed positions, limited escape routes, and terrain that favored defenders over attacking forces. Major Bradley Collins from Joint Special Operations Command appeared on the main screen via satellite link, his expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. "RAF Thornwick, we need immediate air support for search and rescue operations. Enemy forces have established a significant defensive perimeter, and our ground-based extraction options are extremely limited." Devon's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The mountainous terrain would force aircraft into predictable approach routes, exactly where enemy surface-to-air missiles would be positioned. Standard rescue operations would result in massive casualties among both aircrew and the remaining ground teams. "Sir," Mackenzie's voice carried clearly across the operations center, "we can have 4 A-10s airborne within 30 minutes. Harper and Davies are our most experienced combat pilots." "Negative," Collins replied sharply. "Intelligence indicates at least 12 active SAM sites in the operational area. We've lost 2 Apache helicopters already. Fixed-wing aircraft approaching at standard attack profiles would be suicide." Devon felt her pulse quicken. She knew the SAM positions, had identified them weeks ago through careful analysis of satellite imagery and electronic intelligence. More importantly, she developed attack profiles that can neutralize them using terrain masking and unconventional approach angles that would confuse enemy tracking systems. "What are our options, Major?" Wells asked. Collins paused, consulting information off-screen. "We're coordinating with U.S. Air Force for B-2 bomber strikes on known enemy positions, but that won't be available for 18 hours. The window for recovering our teams alive is closing rapidly." Devon watched the faces around her. These were competent, experienced military professionals, but they were thinking within conventional parameters. The enemy had anticipated conventional responses and prepared accordingly. What was needed was an unconventional approach, the kind of creative, tactical thinking that her superiors had consistently criticized as dangerous overthinking. Flight Lieutenant Harper stepped forward. "Sir, if we coordinate multiple aircraft in simultaneous attacks from different vectors, we might be able to overwhelm their defensive systems. The terrain doesn't support multi-vector approaches. The mountain ridges create natural choke points that channel all aircraft through predictable corridors. The enemy has positioned their defenses accordingly." Devon bit back the urge to speak. She'd mapped those mountain ridges in excruciating detail, knew every valley and ridgeline that could provide alternative approach routes, but her analysis had been dismissed as unauthorized overreach, and speaking now would only confirm her reputation as someone who couldn't stay within her assigned role. "Ma'am," Mackenzie addressed Wells, "perhaps we should wait for the B-2 strikes. A coordinated bombing campaign might create enough destruction to allow conventional rescue operations." 18 hours, Wells repeated grimly. "Major Collins, what's the survival probability for our teams if we wait 18 hours? The silence on the satellite link stretched for several seconds. "Honestly, Wing Commander, based on enemy capabilities and the tactical situation, survival probability drops to less than 20%. These aren't militia forces we're dealing with. This is a well-equipped, regular military force that has been planning this operation for months." Devon's analysis had identified exactly that: evidence of extensive preparation, foreign military advisors, and sophisticated equipment that exceeded anything that should have been available to regional forces. Her warnings had been dismissed as overcomplicated analysis, but now those warnings were proving tragically accurate. The operations center fell silent, except for the soft static of radio communications and the hum of electronic systems. 290 elite soldiers were trapped in a carefully prepared killing zone, and every conventional response would result in catastrophic casualties. Devon stared at the tactical display showing the operational area she'd studied for months, knowing that somewhere in those mountains, the best soldiers in the world were running out of time while their commanders struggled with a tactical problem that had no good conventional solutions.
The operations center had settled into the grim efficiency of crisis management when Devon made her decision. She'd watched for 30 minutes as senior officers coordinated with various command centers, exploring options that ranged from inadequate to catastrophic. Every conventional approach to rescuing the trapped SEALs would result in massive casualties, and time was running out. Devon took a deep breath and stepped forward from her position at the back of the room. "Ma'am," she said clearly, addressing Wing Commander Wells. Wells turned, her expression showing surprise and annoyance at being interrupted during a critical briefing. "Flight Lieutenant Evans, this is not the time. Ma'am, I know the terrain in Grid Sector 7. I've identified approach routes that could avoid the enemy SAM positions." The operations center fell silent except for the ongoing radio chatter. Every eye turned toward Devon, and she could see expressions ranging from disbelief to barely contained anger. She'd just violated the cardinal rule of military hierarchy by offering unsolicited tactical advice during a crisis briefing. Squadron Leader Mackenzie's face flushed with embarrassment and fury. "Evans, return to your station immediately. This is not appropriate." "Sir, with respect, I've conducted detailed terrain analysis of the operational area. There are alternative approach vectors that—" "Alternative approach vectors," Flight Lieutenant Harper interrupted with undisguised contempt. "You're a maintenance pilot, Evans. You've never flown combat operations in your life." Devon felt heat rising in her cheeks, but pressed on. "I've studied the satellite imagery, mapped the defensive positions, and identified weaknesses in their coverage patterns. The enemy has positioned their SAMs to cover conventional approach routes, but there are gaps that can be exploited using terrain masking." Major Collins's voice crackled through the satellite link. "Who is this pilot? What's her combat experience?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Devon had logged over 800 hours in A-10s, but none in actual combat. Her experience was limited to training exercises and equipment maintenance flights, exactly the background that made her unsuitable for dangerous missions, according to everyone in the room. "Flight Lieutenant Evans has no combat experience, Major," Wells replied curtly. "She's assigned to training and logistics duties." "Then why is she offering tactical advice?" Collins asked, his tone making clear what he thought about junior officers overstepping their boundaries. Flight Lieutenant Davies stepped closer to Devon, his voice low but carrying clearly across the quiet room. "This is exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior we discussed, Evans. You can't help yourself, can you? Every crisis becomes an opportunity for you to prove how much smarter you think you are than everyone else." Devon's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to save lives. You're trying to insert yourself into a situation that requires real combat experience." Harper cut her off. "This isn't a training exercise where you can hesitate and second-guess every decision. People are dying while you're playing tactical analyst." Wing Commander Wells raised her hand for silence, her expression coldly professional. "Evans, your unauthorized intelligence analysis has been noted and dismissed by proper authorities. This is a complex combat situation that requires experienced pilots making split-second decisions based on proven tactical doctrine." "Ma'am, proven tactical doctrine is exactly what the enemy has prepared for. They've positioned their defenses to counter conventional approaches. What's needed, Mackenzie interrupted sharply, "is discipline and adherence to proper chain of command, not wild theories from a pilot who's never been shot at in her life." Devon looked around the room at faces filled with dismissal, embarrassment, and barely contained anger. These people saw her as the squadron problem child, the pilot who couldn't accept her limitations and constantly tried to prove herself by offering unsolicited expertise. "Ma'am," Devon tried once more, "I've identified specific coordinates where terrain masking could—" "Enough!" Wells' voice cut across the room with absolute authority. "Evans, you're dismissed from this briefing. Return to your quarters immediately and remain there until further notice." Devon felt the words like a physical blow. As 290 elite soldiers faced death in the mountains, she was being sent to a room like a child who'd spoken out of turn. Her months of preparation, her detailed knowledge of the operational area, her unconventional solutions to an impossible problem, all dismissed because she lacked the combat experience that she had never been given the opportunity to gain. "Ma'am, please." "Security," Wells called out, her patience finally exhausted. "Escort Flight Lieutenant Evans to her quarters." Two military police officers stepped forward, their expressions sympathetic but determined. Devon realized that further protest would only reinforce her reputation as insubordinate and potentially result in formal disciplinary action that would end her career entirely. Devon sat in her quarters for exactly 17 minutes after the MPs left, staring at the tactical maps that covered her walls, while the sound of increased aircraft activity echoed across the base. Through her window, she could see ground crews preparing helicopters and transport aircraft for what she knew would be inadequate rescue attempts. The conventional responses that Wing Commander Wells was coordinating would result in catastrophic casualties. Her secure radio, still tuned to the base emergency frequency, crackled with updates that confirmed her worst fears. Rescue attempt Alpha failed. 2 aircraft down. No survivor contact. The clinical language couldn't hide the reality that good pilots were dying while attempting missions that her analysis had predicted would fail. Devon opened her laptop and pulled up the detailed terrain maps she developed over months of unauthorized study. The enemy had positioned their defenses with sophisticated understanding of how NATO forces would respond to a crisis. Surface-to-air missiles covered all conventional approach routes. Anti-aircraft artillery created kill zones at predictable altitudes. Electronic warfare systems would disrupt standard navigation and communication equipment. But her analysis had also identified vulnerabilities that conventional military doctrine wouldn't exploit. Ultra-low altitude approaches through specific valleys that would mask aircraft from radar detection. Terrain features that would confuse heat-seeking missiles. Electronic dead zones where jamming systems had limited effectiveness. Her radio crackled again. SEAL Team Charlie, emergency beacon active. Approximately 40 personnel, multiple casualties, ammunition running low. Devon's heart clenched. 40 soldiers were broadcasting their position in desperation, knowing that revealing their location would draw enemy fire, but hoping that rescue aircraft could reach them in time. According to her terrain analysis, their position was in a valley surrounded by multiple SAM sites, a death trap for any conventional rescue attempt. But there was another way, a route that required flying at altitudes and through terrain that would terrify most pilots, an approach that demanded split-second timing, perfect navigation, and the kind of aggressive flying that her superiors had consistently said she lacked the instinct to perform. Devon stood up and began gathering her flight gear. Not the standard equipment assigned to training pilots, but the specialized gear she'd acquired for exactly this type of mission. Night vision systems that would allow navigation in complete darkness. Electronic countermeasure equipment that could confuse enemy guidance systems. Emergency medical supplies that could stabilize casualties during extraction operations. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over as her mind calculated fuel loads, weapons configurations, and flight profiles. She'd rehearsed this scenario dozens of times in simulation, always knowing that the real test might come when disobedience was the only way to serve the greater mission. The base security protocols were designed to prevent unauthorized personnel from leaving, not to stop qualified pilots from accessing their aircraft. Devon's maintenance responsibilities had given her legitimate access to the flight line, and her detailed knowledge of security rotations meant she knew exactly when and where she could move without detection. She slipped out of her quarters through a maintenance access that connected to the vehicle depot, then followed a route she'd memorized through service corridors and equipment areas. The night shift was focused on supporting the official rescue operations, creating gaps in coverage that she'd identified weeks ago during her unauthorized preparation. The A-10, designated as her training aircraft, sat in its hardened shelter, fueled and armed for what was supposed to be a routine weapon certification flight scheduled for the following morning. Devon had personally supervised its preparation, ensuring that every system was operating at peak efficiency and that the weapons load was configured for ground attack operations. As she approached the aircraft, Devon felt a strange calm settling over her shoulders. This was the moment she'd been preparing for her entire military career, the test that would either prove her months of dedication or destroy everything she'd worked to achieve. She began her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking systems that she knew were perfect, but following the procedures that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. The GAU-8 cannon was loaded with high-explosive incendiary rounds designed to destroy armored vehicles. The AGM-65 Maverick missiles could eliminate point targets with surgical precision. The AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles would provide defense against enemy aircraft. But the most important equipment wasn't visible on any official manifest. Devon activated her personal GPS system loaded with the coordinates she'd calculated for the ultra-low altitude approach routes. She initialized her electronic countermeasure systems, configured specifically for the enemy radar signatures she'd identified through intelligence analysis. She secured her emergency medical kit, positioned for rapid access during extraction operations. Her radio crackled with another update. All rescue attempts suspended due to heavy SAM activity, casualties mounting among air crews. Devon completed her pre-flight checklist and climbed into the cockpit. The familiar controls felt like extensions of her own body. every switch and display exactly where her hands expected to find them. She'd flown this particular aircraft for over 200 hours, knew its capabilities and limitations better than anyone else on the base. As she started the engines, Devon realized that she was crossing a line that would fundamentally change her life regardless of the outcome. If she succeeded, she would save lives but face court-martial for disobeying direct orders. If she failed, she would die attempting something that everyone had said was impossible. The engines spooled up to full power, their familiar rumble vibrating through the aircraft's frame. Devon ran through her final systems checks, confirming that every piece of equipment was ready for what would either be the most important mission of her career or the last flight of her life.
Devon's first pass through the valley was a masterpiece of precision flying and tactical execution that would have been impossible for anyone who hadn't spent months memorizing every rock formation and defensive position. She came in from the northeast canyon, flying 20 feet above the deck at 350 miles per hour, her A-10's targeting systems locked onto the surface-to-air missile sites that posed the greatest threat to future rescue operations. The GAU-8 cannon spoke first, its distinctive sound like industrial machinery tearing through sheet metal, amplified 1,000-fold. High-explosive incendiary rounds walked across the first SAM position at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute, obliterating the radar array and missile launchers in a devastating display of concentrated firepower. Enemy soldiers scattered from the impact area, but Devon was already banking hard left toward her second target. Her flight path took her between two ridgelines that conventional tactics would have avoided. The space was too narrow for safe maneuvering and offered no escape routes if she encountered unexpected obstacles. But her terrain analysis had shown that this approach would keep her below the engagement envelope of the remaining SAM sites while positioning her for optimal attacks. The second missile position vanished in a cloud of fire and debris as Devon's AGM-65 Maverick missile struck the command trailer with surgical precision. Her electronic countermeasures detected multiple radar locks from the remaining defensive positions, but her ultra-low altitude and unpredictable flight path made it impossible for their targeting systems to establish reliable firing solutions. SEAL Team Charlie, this is Thunderbolt 07. Mark your position with smoke. I'm coming in for close air support. Thunderbolt 07, SEAL Team Charlie. Popping smoke now. Be advised, enemy positions have us surrounded on all sides. Heavy machine guns and RPGs in the tree line to the south and east. Devon could see the colored smoke rising from the valley floor, marking the position where 43 elite soldiers were making their last stand against overwhelming odds. The tactical situation was even worse than her intelligence analysis had suggested. Enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire that would make any ground-based rescue impossible. And the terrain features that provided protection for the SEALs also limited their ability to break out of the encirclement. But Devon had advantages that the enemy couldn't have anticipated. Her months of studying this specific terrain meant she knew where every boulder and ridgeline would provide cover for ground troops. Her analysis of enemy defensive doctrine had identified weaknesses in their positioning that could be exploited by someone willing to risk ultra-no-altitude attacks. She rolled inverted and pulled the A-10 through a knife-edge turn that brought her gun to bear on a heavy machine gun position that was pouring fire into the SEAL defensive perimeter. The cannon's thunderous roar echoed off the valley walls as 30mm rounds turned the enemy position into scattered debris. Devon's radio crackled with amazement from the ground. Thunderbolt 07, that was surgical. How did you know that position was there? I've been studying your neighborhood for months, Devon replied, already lining up her next attack. Hold tight, I'm coming in to clear your back door. She pulled the aircraft into a climb that violated every rule of safe flying in a SAM environment, but her electronic warfare systems showed that she'd already eliminated the most dangerous missile sites. The remaining threats were short-range systems that couldn't engage targets moving at her speed and altitude. At the top of her climb, Devon rolled the A-10 onto its back and dove toward a cluster of enemy positions that were preventing the SEALs from reaching a potential extraction point.
Her targeting computer painted the area with precise coordinates, while her radar warning receiver remained silent. The enemy's remaining surface-to-air capabilities had been neutralized with mechanical precision. The second Maverick missile eliminated an anti-aircraft artillery position that would have made helicopter extraction impossible. Devon followed with another gun run that scattered enemy infantry formations and destroyed their heavy weapons positions. Each attack was delivered with the kind of tactical precision that comes from intimate knowledge of the battlefield combined with flying skills that pushed her aircraft to its absolute limits. SEAL Team Charlie, your eastern escape route is clear. I count approximately 20 enemy personnel falling back toward the southern ridgeline. Copy Thunderbolt 07. We're moving to the extraction point now. What's your status on fuel and ammunition? Devon checked her displays. She'd expended 60% of her cannon ammunition and both Maverick missiles, but she still had her AIM-9 Sidewinders for air-to-air defense and enough fuel for extended operations in the target area. I'm good for another 30 minutes of close air support, but we need to get you out of here before enemy reinforcements arrive. Her radar warning receiver suddenly lit up with multiple contacts approaching from the south. Enemy aircraft, probably Su-27 fighters launched from a nearby airbase, were vectoring toward her position at high speed. Devon's unauthorized mission had just become significantly more complicated.
The engagement began at 15,000 feet above the Carpathian Mountains, where Devon found herself facing two Su-27 flanker fighters whose pilots had expected to find a defenseless ground attack aircraft. Instead, they encountered an adversary who had spent months studying their tactics, their aircraft capabilities, and the terrain features that could be used to neutralize their advantages. Devon's first move violated every principle of air-to-air combat doctrine for A-10 pilots. Instead of trying to evade the enemy fighters, she dove directly toward them while simultaneously deploying chaff and flares to confuse their missile guidance systems. The maneuver was so unexpected that the lead Su-27 pilot failed to achieve a radar lock before Devon had closed to visual range. Her first AIM-9 Sidewinder missile tracked the heat signature of the lead fighter's engines and detonated in a brilliant fireball that sent debris raining into the valley below. The second Su-27 pilot, shocked by the loss of his wingman, attempted to disengage and gain altitude, where his aircraft's superior performance would provide an advantage. But Devon had studied the engagement envelope of the Su-27 and knew that its pilots relied on altitude and speed to dominate opponents. She kept her A-10 low, using the mountainous terrain to mask her position while the enemy pilot climbed in search of a target that seemed to have vanished from his radar display. SEAL Team Charlie, report your status, Devon called while tracking the remaining enemy fighter through a series of valleys and ridgelines. Thunderbolt 07, we've reached the extraction point. Helicopter inbound, ETA 5 minutes. We need you to keep the sky clear. Devon spotted the Su-27 silhouetted against the morning sky, its pilot apparently convinced that he'd gained a tactical advantage through altitude and position. She armed her second Sidewinder and began a climbing turn that would bring her missile into firing position. The enemy pilot detected her maneuver and rolled into a dive, attempting to use his aircraft's superior speed to escape the engagement envelope of her heat-seeking missile. But Devon had anticipated this response and fired the Sidewinder not at where the aircraft was, but at where it would be when the missile's guidance system acquired its target. The second Su-27 exploded in a cascade of burning fuel and twisted metal, its wreckage adding to the debris field that marked the end of enemy air opposition in the operational area. All enemy aircraft destroyed, Devon reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that made her hands shake on the controls. Airspace is clear for extraction operations. The rescue helicopter appeared on schedule, its crew guided to the extraction point by coordinates that Devon provided through her intimate knowledge of the terrain. She maintained a protective orbit overhead while the SEALs loaded their wounded comrades and prepared to depart the valley that had nearly become their tomb. Thunderbolt 07. This is SEAL Team Charlie Actual. 43 souls departing the area. We owe you more than we can ever repay. Devon watched the helicopter climb away from the valley, carrying soldiers who had been written off as casualties just hours earlier.
Her unauthorized mission had succeeded beyond what anyone had thought possible. But she also knew that the most difficult part was yet to come. Her radio crackled with a transmission from RAF Thornwick. "Thunderbolt 07, this is Wing Commander Wells. Return to base immediately for debriefing." "Copy, Control. Thunderbolt 07 returning to base." The flight back to RAF Thornwick gave Devon time to contemplate what she'd accomplished and what consequences awaited her. She'd violated direct orders, stolen military aircraft, and engaged enemy forces without authorization. Court-martial was inevitable, regardless of the mission's success. But she'd also saved the lives of 43 elite soldiers who would have died if she'd followed orders and remained in her quarters. Her months of unauthorized preparation had made the difference between a successful rescue and a catastrophic loss that would have haunted NATO Special Operations for years. As the Yorkshire coastline appeared on her horizon, Devon realized that she felt no regret about her choices. She joined the military to serve something larger than herself, to use her skills in defense of people who couldn't defend themselves. The fact that doing so required disobedience only proved that sometimes the greatest service came from refusing to accept limitations imposed by others. RAF Thornwick's control tower guided her to a landing that was witnessed by what appeared to be the entire base personnel. Ground crews, maintenance technicians, pilots, and administrative staff lined the taxiways to watch the return of the pilot who had accomplished what everyone said was impossible. As Devon shut down her engines and began her post-flight checklist, she could see military police vehicles positioned around her aircraft. Wing Commander Wells stood nearby with several officers whose rank insignia suggested they'd arrived from much higher levels of command. Devon climbed down from her cockpit and removed her helmet, her auburn hair catching the morning sunlight as she faced the consequences of her actions. She'd proven that preparation and determination could overcome any obstacle, but she'd also learned that some victories came with a price that couldn't be calculated in advance. The question now was whether the lives she'd saved would be deemed worth the career she'd undoubtedly sacrificed to save them.
The atmosphere in the holding room shifted dramatically when Major Bradley Collins from Joint Special Operations Command appeared on the video conference screen. His presence indicated that Devon's unauthorized mission had implications far beyond RAF Thornwick's internal discipline issues. "Brigadier General Morrison, Colonel Crawford," Collins began without preamble, "I'm here to provide operational context for Flight Lieutenant Evans' actions that may not be apparent from the disciplinary perspective." Wing Commander Wells leaned forward, her expression suggesting she wasn't pleased by outside interference in her command's internal affairs. "Major Collins, while we appreciate JSOC's interest, this is fundamentally a matter of military discipline. With respect, Wing Commander. This is a matter of operational effectiveness and strategic implications that extend far beyond one pilot's disciplinary record." Collins consulted documents off-screen before continuing. "Flight Lieutenant Evans' unauthorized intelligence analysis was not only accurate, but identified threats that our official intelligence apparatus missed entirely. Her warnings about enemy force concentration were dismissed, but subsequent investigation has confirmed every aspect of her assessment." Devon felt her heart skip as Collins continued his briefing. She'd known her analysis was correct, but hearing official confirmation from the highest levels of Special Operations Command was validation beyond anything she'd dared hoped for. Furthermore, Collins said, the tactical approach she developed for the rescue operation was studied by our best pilots and deemed impossible. Multiple simulations showed failure rates exceeding 90% for the ultra-low altitude approach she successfully executed. Brigadier General Morrison exchanged glances with Colonel Crawford, both officers clearly receiving information that challenged their assumptions about Devon's capabilities and judgment. "Major Collins," Morrison asked, "what was the operational impact of Flight Lieutenant Evans' unauthorized mission?" "Total success, ma'am.
43 Navy SEALs extracted with 0 additional casualties. Enemy air defenses in the sector neutralized. 2 enemy fighters destroyed, eliminating their ability to threaten future operations in the area. He paused, allowing the implications to settle before delivering what Devon realized was the most important assessment. Brigadier General, without Flight Lieutenant Evans' intervention, we would have lost the most experienced SEAL teams in our inventory. The strategic impact of those losses would have affected NATO special operations capabilities for years. Wing Commander Wells struggled to maintain her composure. Major, regardless of the outcome, Flight Lieutenant Evans violated direct orders and military discipline. Wing Commander, Collins interrupted firmly. Flight Lieutenant Evans demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and tactical thinking that NATO desperately needs. Her ability to identify threats, develop unconventional solutions, and execute complex operations under pressure represents capabilities that shouldn't be wasted on equipment maintenance. Devon watched the faces around her, seeing the careful recalculation taking place as senior officers weighed disciplinary concerns against operational realities. Her unauthorized mission hadn't just saved lives, it had demonstrated capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about her value to military operations. Major Collins, Colonel Crawford interjected, are you suggesting that successful outcomes justify violation of military discipline, because that precedent would undermine the entire command structure? Not at all, Colonel. I'm suggesting that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses, and that punishing exceptional performance serves no constructive purpose. Collins consulted additional documents before continuing. I'm also here to inform you that JSOC has submitted a formal request for Flight Lieutenant Evans' transfer to our Special Operations Aviation Unit, effective immediately upon resolution of current disciplinary proceedings. The request hit the room like a physical shock. Devon stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was hearing. JSOC, the most elite operational command in NATO, was requesting her transfer based on a mission that everyone had expected to result in her court-martial. Brigadier General Morrison recovered first. Major Collins, what was the specific role would Flight Lieutenant Evans fulfill in special operations? Lead pilot for high-risk extraction operations, ma'am. Her demonstrated ability to operate in denied airspace using unconventional tactics makes her uniquely qualified for missions that other pilots can't accomplish. Devon felt her tears threatening behind her eyes, but kept her expression composed through years of practice hiding emotions from superiors who interpreted them as weakness. Furthermore, Collins said, her tactical knowledge and operational planning capabilities are exactly what we need for emerging threats. Wing Commander Wells looked like she was struggling with conflicting emotions, anger at being overruled by higher authority, and perhaps grudging respect for an officer who had exceeded every expectation. Flight Lieutenant Evans, Morrison addressed her directly. Do you understand what Major Collins is offering? Special Operations Aviation is the most demanding assignment in military service. The failure rate in training alone exceeds 50%. Devon's voice was steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Ma'am, I've been preparing for demanding assignments my entire career. This would be an honor. Very well, Morrison decided. Given the operational circumstances and JSOC's formal request, disciplinary proceedings are suspended pending Flight Lieutenant Evans' transfer to Special Operations Command.
6 months after her unauthorized rescue mission, Devon stood in the briefing room at RAF Credenhill, home to the Special Air Service and the most elite military aviation units in NATO. The room buzzed with the controlled energy of operators preparing for missions that conventional forces couldn't attempt, and for the first time in her military career, Devon felt like she belonged. She was no longer Flight Lieutenant Evans, the overlooked logistics pilot who counted equipment while others flew dangerous missions. The patch on her shoulder now identified her as Captain Devon Evans, Special Operations Aviation Regiment, with qualifications that included advanced combat piloting, special reconnaissance, and unconventional warfare tactics. The transformation hadn't been easy. The accelerated training program that JSOC had promised was the most demanding experience of her life, designed to break candidates who weren't completely committed to excellence. Devon had not only survived, but excelled, finishing first in her class and earning the respect of instructors who had initially viewed her transfer with skepticism. Today's mission is codenamed Operation Shadowfall, announced Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the commanding officer who had specifically requested Devon for her unit. We have 26 SAS operators pinned down in hostile territory, surrounded by enemy forces with advanced surface-to-air capabilities. Devon studied the tactical display showing mountainous terrain that looked familiar despite being in a completely different theater of operations. The enemy had learned from their defeat in the Carpathians, positioning their defenses to counter the ultra-low altitude approaches that had proven so effective 6 months earlier. Standard rescue operations are impossible, Mitchell continued. The enemy has established overlapping SAM coverage that eliminates conventional approach routes. They're specifically prepared for the tactics we used in the previous operation. Captain James Harper, Devon's former squadron mate who had transferred to Special Operations 2 months after her own recruitment, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what options do we have if conventional approaches are blocked?" Mitchell gestured toward Devon. Captain Evans has developed an unconventional tactical approach that exploits weaknesses in the enemy's defensive preparations. Devon stood and moved to the tactical display, her confidence reflecting months of validation and successful operations. The nervous junior officer who had been dismissed for overthinking had evolved into a combat leader whose tactical innovations were studied throughout NATO special operations. "The enemy has positioned their defenses to counter our previous low-altitude approaches," Devon explained, highlighting enemy positions on the display. "But they've created a gap in their coverage by focusing on terrain following profiles. We can exploit this by using a high-altitude insertion followed by powered descent directly into the target area." The briefing room fell silent as Devon outlined an approach that violated every principle of survival in a SAM environment. Her plan called for approaching at 35,000 feet, well within the engagement envelope of enemy missiles, then conducting a controlled dive that would bring rescue aircraft to target altitude faster than defensive systems could react. "Captain Evans," Harper said carefully, "that approach would expose aircraft to enemy fire for extended periods. The risk assessment seems challenging." Devon smiled, remembering similar concerns from her days as an overlooked maintenance pilot. "The risk assessment is precisely why it will work, James. The enemy expects us to avoid their SAM coverage, not fly directly through it. Their defensive doctrine is based on intercepting aircraft that try to stay out of engagement range." She outlined the tactical details with the precision that had been dismissed as overthinking. Specific altitudes that would minimize exposure time, electronic countermeasures that would confuse targeting systems during the descent phase, coordination with electronic warfare aircraft that would create additional confusion for enemy operators. "Furthermore," Devon continued, "this approach allows us to deliver precision strikes on SAM positions during our descent, eliminating threats for the extraction phase." Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly. Captain Evans has successfully executed similar approaches in 3 previous operations. Her tactical innovations have become standard procedure for high-threat extractions. Devon felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, but it was different now. Instead of proving herself to people who would never respect her capabilities, she was contributing to a team that valued innovation and effectiveness over conventional thinking. "Team assignments," Mitchell announced. "Captain Evans, your lead pilot. Captain Harper, you're his wingman. Captain Rodriguez will coordinate electronic warfare support." As the briefing dispersed, Harper approached Devon with an expression that mixed admiration with disbelief. "I have to ask, did you know this would happen when you stole that A-10 6 months ago?" Devon considered the question while gathering her tactical planning materials. "I knew that doing the right thing was more important than following orders that would get people killed. Everything else was just preparation meeting opportunity." And if you'd been court-martialed instead of transferred? The mission alarm sounded, indicating final preparations for departure. Devon shouldered her gear and headed toward another impossible rescue, knowing that somewhere in hostile territory, elite soldiers were counting on her to prove once again that preparation and determination could overcome any obstacle. Behind her, RAF Credenhill buzzed with the efficient energy of special operations, where being told something was impossible was simply the starting point for developing better solutions. Devon had finally found her place among people who understood that the most dangerous limitations were the ones that others tried to impose on you. Today, she would save lives again, and tomorrow she would prove that there was no such thing as impossible for someone who refused to accept other people's definitions of what she could accomplish. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.